I never believed in God. I never believed in heaven, hell, or anything beyond what science could explain. To me, religion was a relic of the past, a comfort blanket for people too afraid to accept the finality of death. I prided myself on being rational, logical, grounded in facts. I read books by atheists, watched debates where religion was dismantled piece by piece, and felt a quiet superiority over those who needed faith to navigate life. I mocked those who spoke of divine experiences, dismissed near-death stories as hallucinations, and scoffed at the idea of an afterlife. To me, death was nothing more than the shutting off of a machine. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss new stories. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, it really helps. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Let's discuss. The brain stopped firing, the body decomposed, and that was it. No spirits, no judgment, no eternal bliss or suffering, just silence. I was sure of it, and I carried that certainty like armor. It was an ordinary day, a day like any other. I woke up to the blaring of my alarm, the shrill sound pulling me out of the fog of sleep. I groaned, stretched my arms, and stared at the ceiling for a few moments before grabbing my phone. Like every morning, I scrolled through the news, skimming headlines about political scandals, economic downturns, and the latest conflict brewing somewhere in the world. It was all predictable, all part of the same cycle. Nothing ever really changed, and, as always, there were the usual religious headlines. Prophet claims end times are near. Man survives crash, credits guardian angel. Priest says near-death experience proves heaven is real. I rolled my eyes. People had been screaming about the end of the world for centuries, and yet here we were, still spinning, still existing. I muttered something under my breath about human gullibility and tossed my phone onto the nightstand. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of routine. A quick shower, a cup of coffee, a glance in the mirror before grabbing my keys. Nothing felt unusual, nothing seemed off, but looking back, I wonder if there were signs. Tiny, almost imperceptible shifts in the air, a feeling that something wasn't quite right. If there were, I ignored them, too caught up in my own world to notice. The city was alive with its usual chaos. The honking of impatient drivers filled the air, pedestrians wove through the streets with hurried determination, and the distant hum of sirens blended into the background noise. I had overslept, and I was running late. I checked my watch, sighed, and decided to take a shortcut. One I rarely used, but one that would shave a few minutes off my commute. It was a quieter road, lined with old neglected buildings and cracked sidewalks, the kind of street you drove down without ever really noticing. The sky hung low, a dull shade of gray, the kind that presses down on you, making everything feel just a little heavier. The air was thick, charged with the promise of rain. It clung to my skin, damp and electric, but I barely noticed. My mind was elsewhere, on work, deadlines, the emails I needed to answer. I was too busy planning the rest of my day, too preoccupied with trivial worries to realize that this would be the last morning of my life. Then it happened. It wasn't cinematic. There was no moment of slow moment clarity, no time for my life to flash before my eyes. It was instant, violent, and absolute. One moment, I was gripping the wheel, my thoughts lost in the mundane. The next, I saw something move in my peripheral vision, a blur of metal, headlights too close, too fast. Then, the world exploded. The impact was brutal, a sickening crunch of steel twisting against steel. My body jerked forward, my head slammed into the windshield, and for a split second, pain flooded every nerve in my body. Then, I expected blackness, expected oblivion, but instead, there was something else. Silence. A strange, weightless sensation. And then I saw it. My car, crumpled and smoking, glass scattered across the pavement, and inside, behind the shattered windshield, slumped over the steering wheel, me. I didn't understand. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. I was standing here, fully aware, fully conscious, but I was also there, broken, motionless. A crowd had gathered. A woman covered her mouth with shaking hands. A man shouted something to someone outside my line of sight. Someone else pulled out a phone, their fingers trembling as they dialed. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer, but the sound felt distant, muffled, as if I were hearing it from underwater. I tried to move, to call out, to make them see me, but nothing happened. No sound left my mouth. No one turned their head. No one looked at me. Because I wasn't there, not in the way I thought I was. That's when the fear set in. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even feel my own body. There was only the eerie silence stretching around me, wrapping me in something vast and endless. I wasn't breathing, but I didn't need to. There was no pain, no heartbeat, no physical sensations at all. Yet I was still aware, still thinking, still me. The realization sent a bolt of panic through me, but even that felt distant, like an echo of an emotion I no longer had the capacity to fully experience. I stared at the wreckage in front of me, at the twisted metal and broken glass, at the figure slumped over in the driver's seat. My body. That was me, but I wasn't inside it anymore. The crowd around the accident was growing. A woman knelt beside the wreckage, pressing a shaking hand against my chest, her mouth moving in frantic words I couldn't hear. A man waved his arms, shouting at the incoming ambulance. Another stood frozen, his face pale, his eyes locked on the wreck as if trying to comprehend the horror of it. But none of them saw me. I was standing right there, no more than a few feet away, but to them, I didn't exist. I tried again to speak, to scream, to make them see me, but the soundless void swallowed everything. It was as if I were cut off from the world, a spectator to my own death. Then I felt it. A pull. Gentle at first, almost imperceptible, like a current tugging at my feet. It came from above, from somewhere I couldn't see, but I felt it in my very essence. A force, invisible yet undeniable, was drawing me upward. I tried to resist, though I didn't know why. Maybe because the idea of letting go terrified me. Maybe because part of me still clung to the illusion that this wasn't real, that if I just fought hard enough, I could snap back into my body, wake up in the hospital with nothing but a concussion and a bad memory. But there was no waking up. The pull grew stronger, and suddenly, I was rising. The world below me shrank. The accident, the people, the flashing lights of the ambulance, they all blurred into insignificance as I was lifted higher, weightless, effortless. I wasn't flying. I wasn't moving my body because I no longer had a body to move. I was simply being carried, as if by unseen hands. The cityscape faded, the sounds of sirens and voices melted into silence, and all that remained was a strange, infinite darkness stretching in every direction. I wasn't afraid. Not yet. There was something oddly peaceful about it, like drifting on the surface of a vast, endless ocean. But then the darkness changed. At first, it was subtle, a shift in the air, a faint vibration that I couldn't quite place. Then a sensation, something deep and primal, like a warning whispered straight into my soul. The darkness was no longer neutral. It was watching me. I didn't see eyes, didn't hear words, but I knew with an absolute certainty that I was being observed, not by one thing, but by many, countless presences lurking just beyond my perception, circling, waiting. The peace I had felt evaporated, replaced by a creeping dread that coiled around me like a living thing. The pull upward stopped. I hovered, suspended in the vast emptiness, and for the first time I realized I was no longer alone. Shapes moved in the distance, shifting shadows against the black. They weren't solid, weren't fully formed, but they were there, edging closer, drawn to me like predators scenting blood in the water. I tried to move, to will myself away from them, but I had no control. I was powerless, trapped in a space where the rules of the physical world no longer applied. A sound, low and guttural, reverberated through the darkness. It wasn't a voice, not in any way I understood, but it spoke to me all the same. A single word echoing through the vast nothingness, filling me with a terror so profound it stole every rational thought from my mind. The darkness convulsed, the shadows lunged, and suddenly I was falling. It wasn't a gentle descent, it wasn't like floating, it was violent, absolute, a force ripping me downward with unimaginable speed. The darkness screamed around me, or maybe I was the one screaming, but there was no sound, only the sensation of being dragged into something endless and terrible. I had no time to think, no time to process. There was only the plummet, the suffocating pressure, and the horrifying realization that wherever I was going, there would be no escape. I was falling, faster than anything I had ever experienced, yet there was no wind, no sense of air rushing past me. Just motion, endless and violent, dragging me down with a force I couldn't fight. My mind screamed for it to stop, but there was no stopping, no slowing, no way to escape whatever was pulling me into the abyss. The darkness around me wasn't empty, it was alive, thick and suffocating, pressing in on me from all sides. It had weight, substance, a presence that I could feel in my very core. And worse than that, it had intent. I wasn't simply falling into nothingness. I was being taken. Shapes flickered at the edges of my vision. Not solid, not quite real, but there, moving, twisting. I could hear something now, a sound buried beneath the roaring silence. At first I thought it was distant, but the more I listened, the more I realized it wasn't far away at all. It was close, pressing against my ears, my mind, vibrating inside me. It was voices. Whispers, thousands of them, speaking at once in languages I couldn't understand but somehow felt. The words slithered into my thoughts, foreign yet familiar, carrying an overwhelming sense of malice, of hunger. They weren't calling out to me, they were laughing. The further I fell, the more the darkness around me changed. It was no longer an absence of light, it was a place. Vast, endless, stretching beyond my understanding, and I was plunging straight into it. The air, or whatever passed for air here, grew thick with heat, a suffocating, acrid sensation that burned without flame. The weight of it pressed against me, crushing, as if the very atmosphere rejected my presence. Then, through the suffocating black, I saw it. At first it was only a glow, deep red, pulsing like the dying embers of a fire. But as I fell closer, the glow spread, revealing a landscape that shouldn't exist, that couldn't exist. It was an expanse of jagged rock, cracked and broken, stretching in every direction. Rivers of something thick and molten ran through the crevices, their surfaces bubbling, hissing. The ground writhed, shifting as if alive, and in the distance, rising like a fortress built from nightmares, was an immense structure, black, monolithic, pulsing with a dull, sickly light. I hit the ground, not with the bone-crushing impact I expected, but with something far worse. The moment I made contact, the ground beneath me pulsed, and pain, raw, searing, exploded through me. It wasn't physical, not in the way I had known pain before. It was something deeper, something that reached inside me and twisted. Every nerve, every thought, every part of what I was ignited in agony. I tried to move, to lift myself up, but my body, if I even had a body anymore, was heavy, unresponsive. The whispers grew louder, turning into murmurs, then voices, then screams. Shapes moved through the red-lit haze, figures shifting and indistinct, crawling, staggering, writhing. Some of them looked almost human, others didn't. Their forms were twisted, elongated, grotesque mockeries of what they once had been. Some wept, some screamed, others simply sat in hollow silence, staring at nothing with empty, lifeless eyes. They were everywhere, stretching as far as I could see, an endless sea of lost souls. And then I felt them watching me. Not the ones wandering aimlessly. Something else, something above me, behind me, surrounding me. I didn't dare turn, didn't want to see what lurked in the shadows just beyond my sight. But I didn't have to. I could feel them. Their presence was like ice in my veins, a knowing ancient malevolence pressing against my soul. They were waiting. For what, I didn't know. A voice shattered the air. Deep, resonant, filled with something that made my entire being tremble. You know why you're here. I tried to speak, to deny it, to beg, but no words came. The voice laughed, low, guttural, filled with amusement. You spent your life convinced this wasn't real. You were so certain so sure. Tell me, do you still think that? I wanted to wake up. I wanted to believe this was some elaborate nightmare, a hallucination, a trick of my dying brain. But I knew the truth. I knew it in the very marrow of my existence. This wasn't a dream. It wasn't a delusion. It was real, and I was trapped. I couldn't move. Not because something was physically restraining me, but because my very existence was weighed down by something oppressive, something ancient, something that had been here long before me and would be here long after. The air itself was thick, not with smoke, but with a presence, a force that pressed against me like invisible hands wrapped around my throat. It didn't just suffocate. It invaded, creeping into my thoughts, filling every empty space with a silent, unbearable terror. The voice that had spoken to me wasn't coming from a single direction. It was everywhere, surrounding me, inside me. It knew me. It knew everything. Every moment of my life, every thought I had ever buried, every cruel word I had spoken, every time I had dismissed someone's pain, every time I had mocked the very idea of a soul. I wasn't being judged. That was the worst part. There was no trial, no accusations, no wrath, just the undeniable, inescapable truth. This place wasn't about punishment. It was about revelation. And the revelation was simple. I had chosen this. I tried to force myself to deny it, to cling to the logic that had always been my shield. This wasn't real. This was a dying brain misfiring, a hallucination brought on by oxygen deprivation. But no part of me believed that anymore. I could feel the ground beneath me, rough and uneven, shifting as if it were alive. The sky, or what passed for a sky, was a void, not black, not red, but something deeper, something that devoured all light. In the distance, I could see structures, if they could even be called that, twisted, towering spires made of a material that seemed to writhe, pulsing as if breathing. They stretched endlessly, vanishing into the void above, impossible in their architecture, defying every natural law I had ever known. This place wasn't made. It was something else entirely, something that had always existed. The screams were endless. Some were close, others impossibly far, but they never stopped. They didn't sound human, not entirely. There was something deeper in them, something raw and broken, something that wasn't just feeling pain, but was pain itself. The figures I had seen earlier were moving now, shifting through the haze, each trapped in their own torment. Some clawed at their own skin, as if trying to rip something out of themselves, their fingers digging so deep they exposed muscle and bone, yet they didn't die. They couldn't. Others knelt, rocking back and forth, muttering to themselves in languages I didn't recognize but somehow understood. Words of regret, words of pleading, words that meant nothing here. Then there were the ones who weren't suffering, the ones that watched. They were different. Their forms were obscured, shifting, flickering in and out of focus, but their presence was undeniable. They stood at the edges of the suffering, unmoving, their gazes locked onto those who writhed in the dust. They didn't speak, they didn't touch, they only observed. And that, somehow, was worse. I wanted to run, to escape, but there was nowhere to go. No walls, no doors, no edges. Just endless, boundless suffering, stretching in all directions. And then, I felt it. A change in the air, a shift so profound it sent a wave of nausea through me. Something was approaching. The ground beneath me trembled, the very space around me vibrating with a frequency I could feel in my bones. The other figures reacted instantly, shrinking away, pressing themselves into the dust, their broken bodies trembling. Even the ones who had been watching retreated into the shadows, vanishing as if they had never been there. I turned. It stood in the distance, too far to see clearly, but I knew without a doubt that it was coming for me. It moved slowly, deliberately, and with every step, the weight pressing against me grew heavier. My mind screamed for me to look away, but I couldn't. My body, if I even had a body anymore, was locked in place, my limbs useless, my breath stolen. It wasn't because I was paralyzed. It was because whatever this was, It didn't allow defiance. It was a force beyond comprehension, beyond resistance. I wanted to believe it was some kind of demon, some creature of hell pulled from human nightmares. But I knew that wasn't true. This was something far worse. This wasn't a thing. This was a presence, a force, something that had never been human, had never known love or mercy or light. It didn't hate me. Hate would have required emotion, and there was nothing here but pure, unrelenting dominion. I wasn't a soul to be judged. I was a possession to be claimed. The closer it came, the more the world around me warped. The air vibrated, the screams intensified, and the ground beneath me began to crack, splitting open to reveal something beneath. Not fire, not brimstone. Something deeper. Something alive. I could see movement in the fissures, shapes writhing in the depths, hands stretching upward, mouths opening in silent, endless screams. They weren't reaching for escape, they were reaching for me. The voice returned, but this time it didn't speak in words. It spoke in understanding, in knowledge. It didn't need to tell me why I was here. I already knew. It didn't need to explain what was about to happen. I already felt it. There was no negotiation, no second chances. I had lived my life certain that there was nothing beyond death, certain that I was above belief, above faith, above consequence. I had been so sure. And now that certainty was gone. The figure stopped a few feet from me. It didn't have eyes, but I knew it was looking at me. I could feel its gaze, feel it peeling away everything I was, stripping me down to nothing. The ground beneath me split wider, and the hands that reached for me no longer felt distant. They were real. They were waiting. I tried to scream, to beg, but no sound came. And then I fell. I was falling, but it wasn't like before. This time, there was no acceleration, no violent force dragging me downward. It was slower, deliberate, as if something was pulling me toward a final destination, a conclusion I had no power to resist. The hands that had reached for me weren't just hands anymore. They were tendrils of something ancient, something that existed beyond time, beyond comprehension. They weren't trying to hurt me, they didn't need to. I already belonged to them. I had always belonged to them. The realization settled into me like a weight, sinking deeper than fear, deeper than regret. There was nothing left to fight for, nothing left to hope for. I had spent my entire life denying the possibility of anything beyond death, and now I was here. And I understood. And I understood. The darkness around me thickened, pressing against me, folding over me like living tar. It wasn't just outside of me. It was inside, seeping into every thought, every memory, every part of what I had once been. I could feel myself unraveling, my identity dissolving into the void. Soon there would be nothing left of me, nothing but the suffering, nothing but the eternal knowing that I had been wrong. And then, in the final moments before I was completely lost, I saw it. Light. It was small at first, distant, no more than a flicker against the endless void, but even that flicker was enough to send a ripple through the darkness. The tendrils recoiled, the suffocating weight lifted slightly, and for the first time since I had arrived in this place, something inside me moved. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was something close. I focused on the light, willed myself toward it, though I had no body to move, no voice to call out. It didn't matter. The light was coming for me. It was growing, expanding, pushing against the blackness like a tide. And then I felt it. A warmth unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't heat. It wasn't physical. It was something deeper, something that reached into the very core of me, touching the pieces that had begun to slip away. The darkness fought back. The tendrils lashed out, gripping me tighter, trying to pull me back into the abyss. But the light only grew stronger. It wasn't just illumination. It was something alive, something filled with a presence so vast, so powerful, that the shadows had no choice but to retreat. The more it touched me, the more the weight of the void lifted. And with it, I began to remember myself. Not just who I had been in life, but something more, something deeper, something I had always known but had chosen to forget. The light wasn't just saving me, it was revealing me. The last of the darkness peeled away, and suddenly, I was no longer falling, I was standing, or something close to it. The ground beneath me was solid, though I couldn't see it. The space around me was endless, but it wasn't empty. The light was everywhere now, surrounding me, filling everything, but it didn't hurt. It was gentle, warm, familiar in a way I couldn't explain. And then, through the brilliance, I saw him. The figure wasn't like the others I had seen in the abyss. He wasn't shifting, wasn't distorted. He was clear, more real than anything I had ever laid eyes on. He radiated something beyond light, beyond warmth. It wasn't just love, it was truth. Absolute, undeniable truth. I couldn't look away. I didn't want to. And in that moment, I knew exactly who he was. Jesus. I had spent my entire life denying him, dismissing him as myth, as fiction, as nothing more than the invention of desperate men searching for meaning. I had laughed at those who spoke his name with reverence, mocked those who dedicated their lives to him, and now, here I was, standing before him, unable to deny the reality of his presence. He didn't speak at first, but he didn't need to. His gaze alone was enough to break me apart. It wasn't judgmental, it wasn't angry, it was knowing. He saw everything. Every thought, every moment of my life, every excuse I had made, every opportunity I had ignored. He saw my arrogance, my certainty, my refusal to even consider that I might be wrong. He saw my sins, not as a list of failures, but as wounds, self-inflicted scars I had refused to acknowledge. He saw the years I had wasted, the people I had hurt, the chances I had thrown away. And yet, beneath all of that, he still saw me. Tears streamed down my face before I even realized I could cry. I fell to my knees, not because I was forced to, but because there was no other possible response. The weight of everything I had done, everything I had been, pressed down on me, and for the first time, I understood the true depth of my failure. It wasn't just that I had rejected him, it was that I had rejected love itself. I had chosen pride over humility, selfishness over compassion, certainty over truth. I had spent my entire life running from something that had been chasing me all along. And then he spoke. His voice was not like the voice in the abyss. It was not a sound that simply entered my ears. It resonated through me, filling every part of me, touching the places still raw from the darkness. It was gentle yet powerful, vast yet personal. It wasn't just words. It was meaning, pure and absolute. It is not your time. I gasped, my chest heaving, as if I had been drowning and had only just now broken through the surface. My mind struggled to comprehend what he was saying. Not my time. What did that mean? Was I being sent back? You have been given a glimpse, he continued. A truth you would not see in life. But now, you must choose. Choose. The words sent a tremor through me. Hadn't I already made my choice? Hadn't my entire life been a declaration of my certainty? And yet, standing here in the presence of something so overwhelming, so undeniably real, I knew there had only ever been one choice that mattered. Will you accept the truth? The question wasn't a demand, it wasn't a plea, it was an offering, a hand extended, a door unlocked. I didn't deserve it, I knew that. I had done nothing to earn another chance. And yet, in his eyes, I saw something I had never expected to find. Mercy. I tried to speak, but my voice broke. There were no words strong enough, no apology deep enough. But I didn't need words. I bowed my head, my soul trembling, and in that moment, I let go. Of my pride, of my certainty, of everything I had ever clung to. And the light took me. I gasped, choking on the first breath that tore through my lungs. My body convulsed, my chest rising and falling in violent, desperate spasms as I came back into myself. Pain surged through me, raw and electric, every nerve in my body igniting at once. The blinding white of hospital lights burned into my retinas, too sharp, too real. dragging me out of whatever place I had been before. Distant voices shouted, machines beeped frantically, hands pressed against my skin, checking my pulse, my vitals, making sure I was alive. But I already knew. I was back. I could feel the weight of the world pressing against me again, the familiar heaviness of flesh, of gravity, of existence. But I wasn't the same. I would never be the same. Being the same. The doctors said it was a miracle. My heart had stopped for nearly 6 minutes. They had done everything they could, but there was a moment when they thought I was gone. And then, without warning, my body jolted, life forcing itself back into me as if something had reached in and pulled me out of the abyss. They called it an anomaly, an unexplainable recovery. But I knew the truth. I had been sent back, and I knew why. The days that followed felt surreal, like walking through a world that no longer fit around me. My body was healing, but my mind was fractured, torn between two realities, the one I had always known and the one I had glimpsed beyond death. The memories haunted me, lingering just beneath the surface of my thoughts. The darkness, the weight of it, the way it had almost swallowed me whole, the presence that had watched me, claimed me, dragged me down, and then the light, the voice, the mercy I had been given despite everything I had done, despite everything I had been. I tried to talk about it at first only to the doctors, then to my family, but they didn't understand. How could they? I could see the way they looked at me, their careful, uncertain expressions, the hesitation in their voices. They wanted to believe I had just experienced some kind of hallucination, a dream brought on by a dying brain gasping for oxygen. Even the ones who believed in something beyond this life struggled to accept what I was telling them. Not because they thought I was lying, but because the truth of it was too much. It was easier to rationalize, to dismiss, to find comfort in the idea that I had simply imagined it all. But I hadn't. I could still feel it, the weight of his gaze, the warmth of the light, the certainty of the choice I had made, and I knew, deep in my soul, that I hadn't been sent back to keep silent. I had been sent back to tell people what I had seen, what I now knew to be real. The problem was, I didn't know how. For most of my life, I had been the skeptic, the cynic, the one who dismissed faith as weakness, who prided himself on logic and reason. And now I was the one trying to convince others of something they couldn't see, something they couldn't touch. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent years arguing against faith, tearing apart the beliefs of others, mocking the very idea of an afterlife. And now, I was living proof of it. The people I had once laughed at, the ones I had thought were clinging to fairy tales, I had become one of them. The weight of that realization was suffocating. I spent weeks trying to push it down, trying to move forward, to ignore the urgency clawing at my chest. I told myself it wasn't my responsibility, that no one would listen anyway, that the world would reject my words just as I had once rejected others. But the truth wouldn't leave me. It pressed against me, filled every empty moment, whispered in the quiet spaces of my mind. So I started talking. Not to everyone, not at first, but to the ones who would listen. I told them what I had seen, what I had felt. I told them about the darkness, the way it knew me, the way it had welcomed me as if I had always belonged there. I told them about the presence that had pulled me out, about the light, about the voice that had offered me a choice. I told them about Jesus, not as an idea, not as a historical figure, not as a religion, but as a reality, as the only truth that had mattered when everything else was stripped away. Some people believed me, some didn't. Some looked at me with the same doubt that I had once worn on my own face. And that was fine. I didn't need to convince them. I only needed to tell them, to give them the chance to hear what I had refused to hear when I was alive the first time. Because I knew now, beyond any doubt, that one day they would all see it for themselves. And when that moment came, I only hoped they would remember what I had said before it was too late.